I'm very critical of the RBA in this book. I say that running tighter monetary policy than the rest of the world between 2013 and 2019 gave us unnecessarily high unemployment, several 100,000 people on average unnecessarily unemployed. I call that voluntary unemployment, voluntary in the sense that the Reserve Bank chose to have it. That cost Australia an average of around 50 billion a year in GDP, 20 billion in costs to federal and state budgets. And it resulted in a set of economic circumstances that I describe as the dog days. In those years, Australian economic performance was abysmal by global standards, by developed country standards. So we had no growth in average output, no growth in incomes of ordinary people for those 6 or 7 years. Very unusual to have stagnation of incomes for such a long period. And compared with the rest of the developed world, we went from being the top in productivity growth and growth in average output per person in the 90s. We went to the bottom. The irony is that the government did such a good job of the immediate response that a lot of people aren't feeling a shock. It's a bit like the GFC. Australia was one of only 2 developed countries, with Korea, not to have a deep recession during the GFC. When it was all over, people were saying, what's the fuss about? You spent all this money when we didn't have a recession. We had a very large, huge fiscal expansion, unprecedented both in dimension and in speed of application. It was necessary, absolutely inevitable in those circumstances. You'll make a few blues, and they made a few blues, but the policy was right, and putting it in place meant that our economies performed much better than it would have. We did have a recession, but we're coming out of it relatively early. The fact that it wasn't as long and as deep as it would have been is causing some people to say, well, we're doing all right. We didn't have much of a problem. Well, we didn't have much of a problem because we ran a deficit in the first year of the pandemic that was bigger as a share of the economy than any in history. And when we ran another one in the current financial year, twice as big as any in our history. Well, if you run a deficit like that, you don't have a deep recession. Several things are necessary for us to come out of this well. If we did what we did after the GFC and try to hold back to balanced budgets, we never made it in the dog days, but that was the objective. We hauled back the deficit prematurely. We ran tighter monetary policy than the rest of the world, and that gave us unnecessarily high unemployment, unnecessarily low productivity growth, unnecessarily low business investment in the trade-exposed industries. So what matters is how we come out of it next. Well, every tonne of carbon dioxide goes into the atmosphere increases the damage. And individuals can affect what they put into the atmosphere. So that's the first thing. And when you really think through the ethics of climate change, then you realise we've actually got a personal responsibility. The damage from climate change is already killing some people. It's already doing some damage. And every tonne of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere does more damage. It's not a get out of jail card to say that the damage will be to people mainly in the future, or to people a long way away, we don't know. That's morally the equivalent of firing a rifle into a distant crowd. Already we are actually having some effect. The voluntary actions of Australians have already had a noticeable effect, but the really big ones are the results of policies.